Are you a beginner at watercolor? Do you want an easy street scene? Well, this could be the video for you. Nice and simple, easy street scene based on the village of Saint-Martin-de-Gerson in southwest France. And we have a very simple composition. There's the village church tower, nice bit of light catching the left-hand side of that tower. The village shop on the left-hand side here, and we can see silhouetted the lamp and the shop sign as well. Simple shadows going across the scene, connecting with the car, going to keep the car nice and simple. So a very easy street scene, not too difficult with the perspective as well. Very often in street scenes you can have some complex perspective to get right, to add realism to the scene and help draw the eye into the composition. But this is quite easy here, not too difficult at all. I'm going to include a figure as well. Always good to have a figure in a composition. I'm going to have a figure on the left-hand side of the street, about here, a head, a body, and we'll have a couple of legs going into the shadows, something like that, and a good balance of that with the car. So my video will be covering the 4 stages of doing a watercolor painting. Well, if you think this could be a 5th stage, this could be stage number 1, but I'm actually thinking about the subject, I'm thinking about the composition. In my mind, I'm almost painting it already, and I know the kind of steps I'm going to go through, but I'm going to cover the 4 main steps of doing a watercolor painting. And that is step number 1, doing the outline drawing. So making sure that before I start painting, I've got in the main objects, that I'm going to be painting: the shop on the left-hand side, the church tower, the car, the figure, the wall on the left, the shadows going across the street, making sure that is absolutely correct before I then go on to the painting stage. The painting stage will be the other 3 steps, starting off with stage number 2, laying down a wash, covering the whole of the scene with paint, except for those areas that I want to keep light. I'm going to have the car fairly light. I'm going to have the figure quite light. There's some objects up on the wall here that I'll keep light as well. So I'll be painting around those with that first wash. So I'm going to cover the whole of the paper, except for those areas that I want to keep light. Step number 3 is going in with the darks, the darker shadows. So we've got the dark shadow on the side of the church there, bit of negative painting around this round tree, quite a simple tree shape to get right. Then there's the dark side of the shop, shadows going across the street, meeting with the car. Good to connect these different objects with those shadows as well. There's a distant shadow, a middle shadow, and then the foreground shadow, starting with some very simple silhouetting of these tops of the pillars on the wall, and then some railing shapes. They're nicely dark against a lighter background. So dark shadows in there on that wall, and drag the shadows across the street into the road, and then drop in that figure on top. 4th stage is the detail stage. So generally with a smaller brush, just pulling the painting together, putting in details like the windows, the lamp there, the street sign, little details of the windows on the background building, these railings on the right-hand side as well. Maybe some lines on the road just to help with the perspective and lead the eye into the composition. So there's the 4 steps, an easy watercolor painting. Step 1, the drawing. Step 2, the wash. Step 3, the shadows. And step 4, the details. So the first stage will be the outline drawing. Paper I'm using is Saunders Waterford cold press paper. So this is the medium texture. You get watercolor paper in 3 different textures. There's hot press, which is really smooth, good for doing detailed paintings or botanical stuff, still life. Most artists though prefer a rougher surface, so I'm using the cold press or NOT, N-O-T, which is the medium roughness, if you like. And then there's rough, aptly named, good rough surface. So this is the medium one, this is the one in the middle. And this is 300 grams in weight, 140 pounds. And with this drawing, this is step number 1, get in the main objects. So the front of the building on the left-hand side, the lamp against the sky, and then this church tower with quite an easy pinnacle roof to it. And there's the tree, a bit of background detail. And a car in there as well, just doing a little bit of cross-hatching there just to indicate where the shadow will be. On the left-hand side, we've got a wall with some railings, and then on the top of the pillar at the end of the wall, there's a little sort of ball or structure. That's the edge of the shadows. Likewise, shadows going out from the shop into the street, connecting with the car. This is where I'm going to put the car. I've got the car on the right-hand third, and then I'm going to have a figure on the left-hand third, which I think is a nice balance between the two from a composition point of view. And then the church tower in the middle, just slightly to the left there, do you see, from the middle, from the centre. Head of the figure, body, and then legs, connecting with the shadows. That figure will be light against a dark background, which is another nice thing to achieve with watercolour, the different contrasts in values or tones. So light against dark, dark against light often work, as well as warm colours against cool colours, like a red against a blue, which is what we've got in this picture. We've got the cool blue sky, and then we've got the warmth of the buildings, and then the coolness of the shadows. So that's the outline drawing done, making sure that the drawing is absolutely as good as I can make it before going on to the painting stage. Second stage is laying down the wash for me, and this is where I'm going to cover the whole of the painting, well, most of the painting except those areas that I want to keep very light or I want to paint in a particular way. But in this particular painting, it's going to be the figure on the left and the car on the right. I'll paint around those. So I'm covering up all of the paper, and most of what I'm doing now will not be painted over again. So I've got to get the colours and the values just right. I generally start with the sky, and I'm using a mop brush. So a mop brush is a fairly big brush. It holds a lot of water. It's generally quite soft as well. so we don't see many brush marks on the finished painting, and hopefully it's got a good edge to it and a good point, so I can paint around carefully around edges. The colours I'm using, right at the top I've got neutral tint, then burnt umber, burnt sienna, yellow ochre, viridian green, cobalt green, cerulean blue, cobalt blue, ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson, Windsor red, then a light red, cadmium orange, and then down the bottom left corner is a lemon yellow. This is the wall on the left-hand building. Well, I've left a little white mark there. Do you see in the middle of the building? That's where there will be a light. So there's the light on the wall, the figure, and the car I'll leave unpainted. The paint now, I'm using the same brush, but the paint now is just slightly thicker than the wash of the sky. And it needs to be slightly thicker in consistency, so it's got less water to pigment ratio, and then it won't spread too much into the sky. But I will get a soft edge this way by painting with the sky over the edges of the buildings, the outline of the buildings, and then while the sky is still wet or damp, I'm going in and painting the buildings in the middle ground and the background. There's the tree in the middle. I make sure I mix up quite a bit of the paint before going to the paper, just to make sure that I've got the right colour and I've got the right amount of colour as well, because I don't want to be continually mixing paint up as I'm doing a wash. Otherwise the paint may dry too quickly and I'll end up with some borders where the paint has dried too quickly and I'm not fast enough to continue down to the bottom of the painting with a nice continuous wash. So there's the right-hand buildings. Keep mixing. So I've got to do the rest of the road here. Burnt sienna, ultramarine blue is a good combination to get a nice warm grey. There's a slight slope on my board of about 10 degrees or so, so it's just as I'm painting, it is travelling down the paper just a little bit. Now notice the brush marks I'm making here, as opposed to the sky, which was I was painting in lines mainly to get a nice smooth finish. And I could have wetted the paper first of all to make it damp before laying down the sky, and that would have given me a really flat wash. But the sky wasn't too large in area, and I'm using a mop brush, as I say, so it's got a good water retaining capacity, and it does allow me to lay down a fairly flat wash without necessarily pre-wetting the paper. But on the road I was doing those sort of zigzaggy brush marks, erratic directions, which will give us some subtle variations in the colours and the tone on the road, because I don't want it too monochrome. It needs to be just a little bit interesting here and there with those different colours. Now, if you do want to have a go at painting projects like this, then please take a look at my Patreon site, patreon.com/Tim Wilmot, and think of it like a club. And you can join at different levels, but one of the main benefits of the club on many of the levels is a monthly project, and I set projects like this for you to paint on a monthly basis, and then you send in your painting to me for a video critique or a text critique, depending on what level you're at. But for more information, there's loads of other benefits as well. We have a monthly get-together. We share each other's paintings. We give each other critiques. So lots of other benefits for watercolor painters all over the world, any kind of level. I've got, in the club, I've got painters of all different levels, but one thing in common, we've all got an enthusiasm of watercolor and painting, mainly landscapes, rural scenes, street scenes like this. So take a look at that, patreon.com/Tim Wilmot. So this is stage number 3. And with a smaller size mop brush now, which I describe more as a sort of medium-sized mop brush, not too small, not too large, but I'm now going in and adding in darker values, darker colors to give depth to the painting and create these areas of contrast. Generally, I'll start with the background, and we are mostly in watercolor working from light to dark. So we are, as the painting progresses, we're going to be using mainly darker paint, darker and darker paint as we go through. But the background needs to be not too dark. In the photograph, there's a lot of green down there. The danger, if I make the background too green, it's going to come too far forward. I want to try and push it back, so it needs to be fairly weak in value and more of a cooler, bluer color. Having the mop brush like this with a good edge and a good point allows you to be a bit more precise with the hard edge of the rooftop of the church here. That's the side there that's facing the sun, so that's a darker color. While that's drying, I'll just paint in the shady side of the left-hand building, the shop, the tobacco, and see where I'm holding my brush. I'm not holding it down too much down towards the brush end. I'm sort of holding it halfway up, which can, if you practice that as a beginner, can make you a little bit more loose with your painting style, rather than holding it like a pen where you can be perhaps too close to the action and you get the danger is your painting style can get a little bit too tight. Down towards the bottom building, I'm now painting around the figure, the head of the figure, and also the going up to the front of the church tower. Now, I'm fairly dark with the shady side of the tree, and using that brush I can create different marks by the angle I'm holding the brush. I can use my fingertips to smudge things or lift out a little bit of paint as well. Bit of neutral tint, alizarin crimson, and get in just the shadow underneath the front bit of the roof facing the sun. And it's a little bit darker than the near side of the church tower. So you've got to look at these values and just think with the different areas, is that lighter or darker? And try and think of almost like a value, a number. So 0, for example, might be white and 10 would be black. So you can work on a scale like that to try and get in your own mind how dark or how light something might be. So this is the side of the top of the church tower that's facing us. And if I think it's just a little bit too damp still on the left-hand side, I can just quickly use the hairdryer here to speed up the drying. Make sure it's completely dry to get a fairly hard edge. Check the point on my brush again and then get that nice straight line, hard edge. And then the right-hand side. This is probably a point of the painting where you need to be fairly careful and try and hold your brush as still as you can when you're making those lines. Now the rest of the tower that's facing us, the side of the tower that's facing the edge on my brush again. If there's too much water, just get some of it off. And then come down the tower to the edge of the tree where I'm going to have a little bit of, this will be negative painting, where I'm actually creating that light area by painting dark around it. And then probably the most complex part of the painting is below the tree or in front of the shop, and there's lots of, when you look at the source photo, lots of abstract shapes of light and dark. So you can replicate that by a few erratic brush marks in different directions, and that can then give the impression of the different objects. There's bins and signs and posts and so on in front of the shop. Starting from the figure then, more shadow in front. And this will be the main shadow that comes out across the road and joins with the car. And that's something else we try and do with shadows, is use that to connect different areas of the painting together so that it's all as one. So that the car's not isolated on its own. It needs to be joined. Well, it's joined with a couple of shadows to it, one behind, one going into the middle of it. Building on the right-hand side. I'll not put too much detail on the side, on the sides of the painting. The main emphasis will be really in the middle area of the painting, the tower, the figure, the car, the lamp, the shop sign, the tobacco sign coming out from the wall. That'd be my main focal point. So anything around the edges will be of less detail. That's the shadow underneath the car and continues over to the right-hand side. Over now to the left-hand side, and quite an easy shape of the pillar on the end of the wall. And there'll be some railings going off of that. But I'm keeping it nice and simple, nice and easy by having it all in the shade. As I said, it's on the side of the painting, so I don't want too much detail. And then an impression of a few railings. Continue on down the wall. So that's another hard edge there behind the hard edge of the wall against the side of the house behind it, and then continue down to the base of the wall. And the shadows I want to keep fairly cool. The figure's going to connect with these shadows, so I need to drag them across the pavement and into the road. Because this is quite a large area to cover, I've decided to go back to another big mop brush that's got the capacity to allow me to paint over this large area in one go without having to go back too many times to the palette. I'm mixing mainly blue colours here. A lot of cobalt blue primarily, which works well for a cool shadow. The shadow would be a little bit lighter as we come out into the road, so darker on the left, lighter on the right, and then again with those sort of crisscross brush marks, just fill in the rest of it. Doesn't matter if I leave a few little bits of the paper showing there, that can add to the freshness of it. But using those crisscross brush marks, that just, again, like the road surface, it just gives you a more interesting surface rather than too flat. Right, back to my medium mop brush and continue with the figure. So if I've got figures in shadows or going into shadows, I would do the shadows first and then drop the figure into the shadow, just so that I get a good smooth connection of, say, the legs to the shadow. So this figure's got a lighter top and then a darker bottom. And with the legs, just drop those into the shadows. So that really is the third stage done, covering or painting all of the main shadow areas, getting some depth into the painting, some range of cools, warms and cools, and then creating those shapes. Like we created the shape of the figure, we created the shape of the tree with some negative painting. And now this fourth stage, I'm going down to the detail stage, and this is where I'm using a smaller brush, a synthetic brush, just so that I can be a bit more precise with some of the details. I'm using darker paint now, thicker, not so much water. We'll get some dry brush marks as well with this brush. just give a hint of some windows and some lines on the front of the building on the right. Not too dark, not too detailed. A few windows in the upper story. There's a fence, side of the road. And these lines, they're going to help draw the eye into the scene. Now I've lifted off a little bit of paint there. The line started dark in the lighter area on the road, but then as I went into the shadows, I've lifted off a little bit, which is another watercolor technique where you've got a damp brush and you've maybe just squeezed out the brush a little bit so that when you touch the wet surface, it's going to suck up that paint off the surface to give us a lighter line. There's some railings just connected to the side of the shop and another pillar. A bit of shade on the wall at the bottom of the shop. Few lines on the side of the shop. Now for the lamp. So I'm just covering or going over the lines that I drew before. I can just about see those pencil lines showing because the sky wasn't too strong. And then the bracket, attaching it to the wall, bit of a fancy top to the lamp, something on top of the church steeple. A diagonal shadow for that light object on the side of the wall. Just helps pull the design together, these diagonal shadows. I'm using a sword brush here, which is a brush that's shaped like a dagger or a short sword. And this is really good for doing foliage or trees or thin lines as well. Again, it holds a lot of water. And this is a fairly watery mix that I've got here to create that tree on the right-hand side, which I know is bright green in the source photo, but I've kept it fairly dark just to help frame and balance the shadow in the bottom left corner. So with this brush, it's quite easy to suggest these different foliage shapes, branches, the canopy of the tree in a fairly loose way. Back to my smaller detail brush and paint in the windscreen of the car. And that car is fairly easy to draw and paint because it's coming towards us, so the shape of the car is easier to do rather than it being a side profile of the car, which can be sometimes tricky. You can end up with the car, perhaps if you don't practice drawing cars, you can end up maybe with a car that's too short or too long, or the wheels too close together. So it's a lot easier having the car coming towards us or going away from us. The tobacco sign. Now with shop signs and road signs, I don't often actually put in the letters. That can often be, well, your eye is drawn too much to that. So I tend to just suggest letters maybe on road signs or shop signs. It's quite a distinctive shape of the tobacco sign, but I've kept it fairly red. Just dropping a little bit of extra colour in the shady side of the shop. A few more lines into the shadows. Need some posts on the railings on the far side. And just with the perspective, just make sure that the posts are getting narrower. The spacing is getting narrower as I go into the distance. There is this no entry sign just to the bottom left-hand corner of the tree, and I'm just painting in the top and bottom halves, then leaving the middle. That's the white line, if you like, but it's not white because it's in the shade, so it's actually, that white line going horizontally is actually quite dark. But that's sort of suggesting just doing those two halves, a bit like a hamburger. The two halves of the bun. That suggests that no entry sign. It's a case of really pulling everything together at this stage with the smaller brush, just checking all the different parts of the painting and adding in, within reason, not overdoing, but within reason, just a little bit of extra detail. Using the finger again just to lift off a little bit of paint to try and keep things light towards the edge of those shadows. A bit more on that building there as well. As well as these YouTube videos, I also do a number of live events. If you go to crowdcast.io/Tim Wilmot, you'll see my live online watercolor workshops that I do, normally one a month, different subjects, and that's a live paint-along experience with me. And again, you get your video, your painting critiqued in a video. I will just try and pull this wall together by adding in a few little darker accents in it to suggest the perspective and just some darker areas of the wall. A few dry brush marks there for tire marks on the road. Always a good way of adding in a few more lines to help with the perspective and just leading the eye into the middle of the picture. Of course, the trick is knowing when to stop with a painting, and really when you start hesitating, and you get a feeling for when you've actually stopped painting, and it's a good time to put the brush down. I think this wall just needs a little bit more dark in there to suggest that the top of the wall going up to the pillar, and then the bottom of the wall. So that blue wash is actually quite dry now, and the black paint is quite thick, so it doesn't move around too much. Here's the finished painting then, an easy street scene based on Saint Martin de Gerson in southwest France, and easy from a point of view of very simple building shapes, not too much perspective to deal with, and including a figure and a car, and just very simple shapes, nothing too difficult, nothing too complex, and a simple tree shape as well. But keeping it very easy with the building shape, trying to keep it loose as well. So I covered the importance of doing the drawing, first of all, making sure the drawing is correct before going to the painting stage, and thinking about the composition as well, making sure that you've got in your mind a nice balance to the composition, which I think I was able to achieve with the figure here, the car on the right-hand side, then the church tower, the steeple, some little details of the lamp and the shop sign as well. But I don't want to have too much detail around the edges of the painting. I want to keep everything really within that area of the picture. Very simple, very loose shadows as well. I drew those in just to make sure I knew what lines to follow when I'm painting in the shadows. I did some cross-hatching with the drawing of the side of the church that I wanted to have in the shade, and you can see that it's very difficult to see those pencil lines, so don't worry too much about some of these pencil lines, perhaps just showing through in just a few minor places of the painting. That car I kept quite simple as well, a car almost coming towards us or going away from us, but a nice simple shape to it. Just think of it as a geometric shape of basically rectangles, and that's almost like a triangle in a way, and then the rectangles of the windscreen and the front of the car. The figure was kept nice and simple as well, a light figure against essentially a darker background, and you saw the way I drew the figure by putting in the head first of all, and then putting in the body, and then very simply the legs going down, dripping down into the shadows. So hopefully you enjoyed that. A nice simple street scene. Have a go yourself. Drop in some comments. Please subscribe if you like this. It does send a nice message to Google that you like the video, and you'll also get notifications. Click on the bell icon for notifications on the next video coming up. Thanks for watching. See you next time.